people are being prepared. Millions and millions of people have been prepared in this way. And in the latter part of my book, in the last few chapters, I describe being on a craft, seeing groups of scientists, like 250, 175, massive groups of scientists brought on the craft. And they are not meant to act like the scientist I mentioned before. They are not meant to be out there known as experiencers, or their grants disappear, their reputation disappears at this point in time. So they are given this information in the form that you've described, and I've described massive input of information, and it starts to filter out. Some of the technology that I and other experiencers have used, and I describe it as bridging technology, some of it, because it seems to be somewhere between their almost magical technology that I have seen and observed and what we have today. And it's like a halfway point where they are creating technology that isn't going to move us forward too dramatically and too quickly. And I think many experiencers like myself basically have been used to test this out on for decades now, because now I'm seeing, and I talk about in some of my speeches, technology that they have coming out in our technology, but in a much more juvenile or less sophisticated state. But it's getting towards that. The thing we lack is the consciousness insertion into that technology.
Welcome everyone to Cosmic Convergence, where we dive into the fascinating world of extraterrestrial intelligence, consciousness, and the mysteries of the universe. My name is Daniel, and I'm joined here with my two co-hosts, John and Christian. Today we are joined with Suzy Hansen, who's the founder and director of the Ufocus NZ Research Network, with over 48 years of experience in UFO sightings, investigation, and research into New Zealand and the worldwide. She is also a founding member of the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, a research group consisting of scientists, academics, and leading UFO researchers with representatives in 32 countries on 5 continents. Suzy is also the author of The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. At age 20, her life changed. On a lonely country road, her car was engulfed in a massive ball of white light, resulting in 90 minutes of missing time. The experience resulted in her discovery of an alternate reality, time spent with extraterrestrials on board their craft since her inception as a soul. She outlines the agenda they described to assist human evolution and advancement. Thank you so much for joining us, Suzy.
Thank you, Daniel. You're welcome.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
For my first question, would you be able to give a brief overview of your experience with the Greys, and when did you start remembering these experiences?
Okay, so I've had experiences with the Greys my entire life. At first, I didn't realise that it wasn't until early adulthood that I realised something was going on. So throughout childhood, I would have memories of strange dreams, and sometimes the dreams were being with unusual beings that I couldn't quite see. I got instructions from them, I was given information by them, but sometimes it was like I was struggling to see who or what they were, and I think that was a protection mechanism, so as not to frighten me because of their unusual looks. When I was 20 and I had the experience that you just mentioned in the introduction, that was when I had this massive wake-up call and began to put the pieces together of the memories I'd had in childhood of being in these sterile white environments and being taught unusual things that children don't normally even think or dream or speak about, and that is like levitation and using the mind to control objects and create objects, etc., lots of activities, and with other strange-looking children. So those were the kind of memories that I had. And when I was 20 and my car was lifted off the road late afternoon on a sunny autumn day and put back down an hour and a half later after dark, and it was very dark at that time of the year in New Zealand, that really not only terrified me as to what had happened to me, but it set me on a course of research and investigation to try to get answers, because I'm a naturally curious person. So that led me at the early age of 20 into finding other people or hearing about other people who'd seen what they believed was a UFO, seeking them out and interviewing them. And this led on to several years later living in a place where there was a massive UFO flap going on, which is a concentration of sightings and UFO events over a period of time, in this case from 1977 through to 1980. And in fact, this was actually a worldwide flap, but of course we didn't really know about that at that time in New Zealand. So I was living in a place where this flap called the Gisborne flap occurred, and there were over 200 sightings reported to police, let alone all of those who had sightings in this remote area and didn't report them. So that was really a massive introduction to the fact that, I was having multiple sightings when most people only dream of having one, and B, I was having some kind of contact happening, and there were very distinct events that happened in the small community I was living and teaching in as a young teacher. So once again, I began finding people who were having similar experiences as me, and I guess it went from there. In my 30s, I moved to a small city, and that's where I joined a UFO group. And it took me several years being part of that UFO group and even working on their committee before I bucked up the courage to actually talk to the chairperson about my own experiences, because it seemed so out of the norm. Although I'd met a few other people who'd experienced the same in New Zealand at that time, we didn't have any documentation, movies or books that came out a bit later, like John Mack and Bud Hopkins, etc. We had nothing of that kind. So it was, you're on your own and you've got to solve it. So I began working with some of the veteran UFO researchers in New Zealand. So I was quite fortunate in that I was working with men in their 50s and 60s who'd had a lot of experience. Some of them were former New Zealand Air Force, so they were very scientific and precise, and I got a really good grounding with them. As they began to age and pass away, I decided that we needed actually a national register of UFO sightings rather than just these individual different territories of New Zealand. So I founded Ufocus NZ in the year 2000 and took on a staff of mainly aviators, air traffic controllers, pilots and scientists. Over the years, we were quite prominent in the New Zealand media, but once the files were released, the New Zealand MOD files in 2010 and 11, after I'd lobbied the Chief of Defence for 2 years for that, once they were released, it was almost like someone, in inverted commas, had put a blanket over us. So the media then only came to us very rarely, because the Ministry of Defence stated that all alleged UFO sightings, as far as they were concerned, were either misidentified objects or they were natural phenomena. And of course, the thousands of witnesses who've come to Ufocus NZ over the years would beg to differ. Many of these sightings have been easily identified as something else, but there's a great number of them that have no explanation. And are from credible people like aviators and even truck drivers and farmers who have no reason to fabricate a sighting and who are actually quite reluctant to report it, and you have to squeeze it out of them like blood out of a stone. So that's my background in terms of the sightings work in New Zealand and worldwide. But I've also, of course, been an experiencer myself, and that's been a long and interesting journey. So I have worked closely with colleagues in Australia and overseas. I first began speaking about my own experiences in 1989, and 1997 was my first international conference. So I've been talking internationally for a long time in about 8 or 9 countries now. When I put my book out, that created quite a bit of interest, and so the speaking increased from there. I work with an international research group, which you mentioned before, called ISA. That is a group that has got around 32, I think we've increased that now, members in different countries, and we're busy doing research and education, our main aim being to prepare for contact through educating the public, not the already converted, but the general public who don't have much idea of the subject itself. So I'm also involved at the moment with working with what I call third wave experiencers, who are usually in the 30s to mid 40s age group at the moment. And many of them are putting out books, but many of them are also beginning to regain memories in a rather dramatic fashion, mainly just being really drawn to the subject and trying to understand why, or they're having flashback memories. As far as my own memories go, I had a catalyst experience when I was in my early 30s and my children were little. I had an experience where I woke up, or came out of the altered state, I should say, that's used for transportation in those days. And I was standing in my hallway with three greys, and I slipped out of the altered state. They could see I wasn't afraid. They could see I was communicating with them, asking questions, and I heard their telepathy as they was discussing that it was time for me now to remember more. From that point on, I began remembering whole incidents, and in my book I've got 2 chapters on what I call the test incident, where I could remember a massive amount of detail, and a lot of the technology I recall from that particular onboard craft experience has been of great interest to some of the scientists I have met over the years. So that's where I'm at the moment. I am partway through my second book, but I'm not hurrying it because I don't intuitively feel that the time is right yet to put that book out. So I'm taking my time with it and busy working with these other groups at the same time.
Like we mentioned previously, I'm almost done reading your book, and one of the things that was touched upon was about the timing, especially when there was a case where you were on board the craft. You mentioned that they were being kind of testing individuals, groups of people. So some to see how they would feel, like how they would react to having disclosure right away, or actually going with the timing and having it be a slow, drawn out process to avoid certain issues, which makes a lot of sense because I often say to people, well, if they've been doing this, this is probably not the first time they've done this to a civilization that is just getting to the idea of open contact and that we're actually being visited. So that makes sense. So I wanted to ask, because right now, especially in like the spiritual community, the open community, people who have experiences, everyone is kind of feeling that there's a shift going on. It's just like, I don't know about you, but we could feel it in the air. It's weird. And in America, it's in Congress and they're talking about interdimensional beings and stuff. And they're saying that on the news. So there are a lot of us that want this to happen. But what about the people who don't want to adapt? Because I feel like, and I know you've touched on this on a radio show, there are still people who may eventually not accept this at all, like whatsoever. Like what happens to the people who want to do right or want to get this out and try to accept this and move forward? But then you have this other community. I feel like anything short of some kind of cataclysmic event of some kind might not get us to unify in the way that we want.
What you've put together there, Christian, is what the Greys have covered many times. You've got to remember some of the things I talk about in the book where they're actually talking to us about future disclosure and timing, etc., was back in the 80s and 90s. We've moved along the road since then, and we are on a road where some information is coming out. But really, it's only a minuscule drop in a bucket compared to what needs to come out. I see around me, including a lot of my colleagues and close friends, are saying, we want disclosure now, it has to happen now. And when you ask them why does it need to happen now, often they say, because there's been so much secrecy and we have to end it. Yes, that's a good point. They also often say, well, the world is in a terrible state, so the ETs can help us. Well, the agenda that I outline in my book is about them assisting us to help ourselves.
Right.
So as a teacher, I know that if you want a child to learn something and you want them to retain that learning, that information, you can't just feed it to them. They have to know how you get from point A to point B. So they have to learn for themselves. They have to try things out. They have to experiment. They have to practice, etc., until they know it themselves and it's not handed to them on a plate. So it's the same with our society. If someone comes in from somewhere else in the universe and fixes things for us, what has that done to change our personality or our psyche on the planet? Has it enhanced us enough in our spirituality to not do it again? Or are we not going to learn the lesson? It's fixed now, so let's just carry on as we were before. So one of the things that I push in my book is the fact that many, many times the ETs have talked about our spirituality basically going backwards. So there may have been times on the planet when we were closer to nature and we were more caring of each other and other species on the planet. But that's not necessarily the case now. And we all know people who are wonderful environmentalists, who are great with animals, etc., and recycle all their stuff. But we also know that there's the masses of people out there who are not like that. So if we're going to have disclosure and people want it soon, what we have to have in that case would be a massive escalation in our state of spirituality and our understanding of each other and our needs and our understanding of how we affect other creatures and other ecosystems on our planet and beyond. And I wrote a chapter about the galaxy screen, which talks about the effect we can have on what's beyond our planet and even our solar system. So there's a lot of things that the man in the street doesn't know and understand. And until we have a greater understanding of spirituality and why we're here and our link to the planet, in that if the plants don't survive, nor will we, and if the animals and creatures don't survive, nor will we, but if we don't survive, they all will. So, we've got a choice here. Do we continue to exist as a civilization and improve ourselves? Because this is what the complex programs and agenda that I talk about in my book are trying to impress upon us. And this is why so many souls have been involved in these 3 waves of souls coming to the planet at this time to help bring this about. But it's a really difficult job. And when we look at the wider planet, we can see the millions and millions of people who have no knowledge of these things and don't want to know. So what Christian said, well, what about the people who don't want to know? Well, if they are not part of a change or a shift, which we are all feeling, then there has to be some consequence for that. As to what that consequence is, I don't know, but it is a self-imposed one. If people won't shift and can't see that we have to have some sort of unity on the planet and a sense of purpose to improve our environment, then they really will be left out and lost. So we can see now, I hope, after my brief explanation, that disclosure has been held back, put it that way, and largely by the ETs, because they know that we haven't been ready for it. And that's the other thing they talk about frequently is human readiness. What are we ready for? Belief systems and our religions and other belief systems, are they ready for a radical change? Is our technological area ready for a change? But most importantly, is our state of spirituality ready? And I don't think that it is. I hear people in the UFO field, the spiritual field, etc., they say, oh, we're ready. Well, maybe those groups are, but the larger portion of humanity is not. They don't care about UFO sightings. Many of those people are existing day to day to survive with food or water or whatever, or housing. And they're not interested in the things that we are interested in. So you can't have this advanced race come in and make its presence known when people are not ready, or there's going to be a massive ontological shock take place. The other point I want to make is that who is in control of disclosure? Is it us, or is it actually the ETs? Because they will have very good reasons for wanting us to repair our planet and elevate our spirituality and our understanding of the cosmos. And maybe it will be that we will become a part of their associations, or maybe it will be that we will save our planet from destruction and therefore the destruction of other nearby civilizations. We don't know at this point in time. Lack of spirituality is the number one thing, because my next point is the technological race. They have very advanced technology. And in my book, I talk about some of the technology that I and other experiencers have used, and I describe it as bridging technology, some of it, because it seems to be somewhere between their almost magical technology that I have seen and observed and what we have today. And it's like a halfway point where they are creating technology that isn't going to move us forward too dramatically and too quickly. And I think many experiencers like myself basically have been used to test this out on for decades now, because now I'm seeing, and I talk about in some of my speeches, technology that they have coming out in our technology, but in a much more juvenile or less sophisticated state. But it's getting towards that. The thing we lack is the consciousness insertion into that technology. Now, if we were to be given technology on a plate and they came down and landed on the White House lawn and handed us all this amazing technology, how would we use it if we don't have the spirituality and unity and understanding of each other on a planet? I would imagine that very soon it would be A, weaponized, or B, monetized. So this is what we're up against. Now, the ETs said that as they will be closely watching how we go through this whole awareness disclosure, if you like to call it, process. Really, it's more than just disclosure. Disclosure, in my mind, is a whole lot of files coming out from various governments and maybe saying, yes, they exist, but not really willing to share a lot of the more meaty information with the public. This is about disclosure, really, to the ETs, is about us preparing for contact with them. And we don't necessarily need papers coming out from any government to do that. We simply have to be elevating spirituality and starting to take care of the planet and clean things up. Are we going to have massive earth changes that will push us along that road? Quite possibly.
Thank you for that, because I often ponder, as I have been for decades now, about the whole, bear with me, it's kind of a statement, but I'll have a question in there. Like our modern civilization, we'll talk about ancient civilizations as being like kind of like savages, right? And I just feel like they had more of a spiritual backbone compared to where we're at now. Western philosophy has kind of gotten rid of a lot of the magic that has to do with the mythos of all of these primitive, that's the term they use, these primitive cultures, right? Primitive being derogatory, meaning that, they're sticks and stones and they're hunter-gatherers, and that's it. Whereas, you're in New Zealand, I know in Australia you have, Aboriginal paintings, petroglyphs, all across the world for that matter, that show, essentially they look like gray aliens to me. And so I have to ponder, well, we probably had, as a human civilization, we probably had more contact with these entity groups like the Greys than we do now, because our spirituality in the primitive cultures was more developed, being one with the land, being one with the earth, being one with the sky, the stars, the sun, the moon, to where we're at now, where everything is so technology. It's like we're practically praying to technology as a whole. You've had a lot of contact with the gray aliens. You've been on their craft. They've shown you things. They've talked to you. And so it's like, I'm just kind of curious, have they ever kind of given like their thoughts about like humanity's past and these like primitive cultures and how we can maybe try to regain some of that some of that magic, I guess you could say, some of that belief, some of that spirituality that we can utilize as a whole to raise ourselves up from this worship of technology. And technology is great if it's used the right way. Like you said, we're going to have this technology, and what is the first thing that human civilization under our leadership is going to do? They're going to try to sell it, make money off of it, or they're going to be like, oh yeah, let's take nukes into space. Have they conveyed any of that to you as well, Susie?
What they have talked about is the path to spirituality, and becoming more aware of nature is one of those things. Now, if I can just take a step back to what I describe in the book as the different groups of souls that have come in, the waves of souls, some of those have had the job of basically working in the environment. And I know that there are a lot of scientists out there who are doing wonderful things for the environment, inventions, technology, ideas, programs, etc. And it's highly likely that some of them have had experiences on board craft but do not remember them, because not everyone who's had experiences on craft has the memories. Some of them are meant to for their path in life, and others are not. And I'm not going to name him, but I know one particular scientist in Scandinavia who I have talked with, and I believe has had years and years, an entire lifetime of contact because of the kind of work that he is doing and some of the memories that he has. But for him to actually go there and start exploring his contact is not actually appropriate. For him to maintain his clean, crisp image, if you can put it that way, as a scientist, making dramatic changes for the planet is the better path for him to be on. So we have a lot of people out there, probably millions of people out there, who are doing things that are helping to raise spirituality, but who don't claim to be experiencers, but who likely may be. And I'm thinking of, even within some of the churches, I know I've been approached by ministers who have talked about their parishioners talking about experiences. And of course, at first they thought, well, this is demonic. And then they begin researching it and finding, hello, this seems very familiar to me. And they are now working within various churches and organisations to make changes in people's understanding of this kind of thing. Instead of it being labelled as, well, they're talking to demons or bad souls, or they have a mental illness or whatever, there's more research and understanding into it. So people are not being boxed and categorised so much. I really do believe that we are going to go through a time of Earth changes, speeding up. And if one thing is sure to bring people to a point of having to work together and rebuild differently, it's that kind of thing. Now, it seems tragic to think that humanity might have to go through that, but we have been going through it since time began. It may just be that we face something that's a lot worse this time. And I have been shown on screen on a craft this kind of thing happening, and it was worse than anything I'd ever seen. But they also gave us some hope in that they said the more spiritual mankind becomes in the interim years, remembering this was back in the 90s, the more spiritual mankind becomes, the less impact it will have on them. And I think that means that our mass consciousness is tied to the planet somehow or other. And if we look at how we're now recognizing that creatures like the octopus and other sea creatures, etc., are sentient, we're starting to understand that at last, then we are making small bits of progress. But I don't know whether it's going to be enough. They are watching at present what's happening with our earth changes and our dramatic weather, our increasingly severe weather, which is happening worldwide. And because this is going to also affect food production, food distribution, wars will affect food distribution. There'll be border security problems with, as we're seeing at the moment with Israel and Hamas, food, etc., getting across borders is difficult. So we have all of these kinds of things which are all spirituality based. If we look at them, they're spirituality based. how do we get to share? How do we stop these wars? How do we get to feed and sustain people who are in crisis? So I don't see an easy path ahead of us, frankly, without sounding too dramatic. But I do have faith that the third wave that I describe in my book, who are now in their 30s to mid 40s or so, are going to be in positions of power and responsibility in a positive sense very soon, if not already. And we're going to see some massive changes in society right across the board. And this is a shift that you're talking about. It's going to take place on all levels. And once that happens, then we're going to have this slide towards spirituality, because it's going to be the only way that is the best way to operate anymore. It's going to be almost like mankind is going to be cornered and channeled in this way. Another way that change can be brought about is that the ETs said in the 90s to a group that I was with that if all else failed, they would begin more frequent sightings. So they would allow more members of the public to see them, not people who've seen UFOs before or believe in them, but people who don't. They will systematically make sure that they are seen, their craft are seen, and eventually craft and entities. And it's very interesting that I was thinking about this and writing about this just recently, and I got a phone call, and it was from a family in New Zealand who contacted me 2 years ago, got cold feet and backed out of being interviewed, but have since come back to me because they have moved along a path of self-discovery and understanding, and now they feel ready to talk about their sighting, which was of a landed craft and entities that got out onto it on a remote beach where they were staying in a small house. So we already have evidence of this starting to happen with more sightings taking place. And once that happens, then it becomes undeniable. Science will not be able to deny what people are seeing and reporting and perhaps even photographing. And also the other thing that matches that sightings aspect is the contact aspect. And more people now in my age group, they don't care anymore, and they're coming out and saying, actually, I've had contact for years and I remember a lot of it, and I'm going to talk about it now. And so we're seeing more people writing books, more people talking about it to their families, etc. And so the ripple in the pond begins to spread, because it's hard to deny this when it's your loved grandfather or mother or father or auntie who are telling you, I've had these experiences, and you've always loved them and known them to be a sane and sensible person. So why would they suddenly start saying something that just doesn't match? So people are going to start taking notice, and this will also swing the pendulum in the right direction.
Agreed. And I'll just remind people that for none of this to exist, and this is directed at the skeptics, for none of this to exist, you have to be 100% that it does not exist. To prove that it does exist, all it takes is 1%. And so all of these experiencers, all of this footage, everything that's coming out now, and of course, we're the older generation than the two people that are with us, Chris and Daniel, right? And so you've expressed that when you had your experiences, there was no place to talk about it. I remember, I was in my early 20s and X-Files, and everybody thought X-Files was this big, huge thing, but that's all we had, or like in the 70s, all I had was In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And now to see where it's at. And so I understand that side note, that there's some people that are younger that are a little frustrated. Why don't we have the disclosure yet? And this is all bogus. They don't really understand, because they don't have the experience of the past even as much as we have, that we've come a long way. And we're going to continue to go farther as long as we stay and beat down that path and create new paths. And with the entities' helps, with the Greys' help, any other entities that are out there that are benevolent, that are trying to assist us, we're going to keep going forward. The thing that the ones that don't want this to come out want us to do is give up. And if we just give that freedom to them like we give so many other freedoms in our life, then we're never going to get to the bottom of it. And just talking to Steve Bassett, which we talked to last week, is just going to lead us to a road of not good things. We're going to end up being a Pompeii. And if nothing else, like you said, the earth will exist if we're not here. The plants, the animals, everything else. And those are the true innocents, is the plants, the animals, from the fungi to everything else. It's not all about us all the time. And I think that's part of that spiritual growth that we need to have. Thank you for those thoughts, Susan. And I think that people just need to realize that we've come a long way, and we just need to continue to push forward on disclosure, because after disclosure, we're going to have a huge task with their help, hopefully, of the post-disclosure world. I would say, not to be doom and gloom, but there's going to be a lot of chaos when people finally realize that, yeah, we've been visited for a very long time. They've always been with us, and we've experienced things with them. And some people are going to be scared to death. And I just have to say, if that time comes in my lifetime, I'll do everything that I can to assist my intergalactic brothers and sisters in staying safe. I can't imagine going to a planet and helping nurture it, and then the time comes to be like, yeah, we're here, and have to deal with what could be coming down the pike. So I thank them for their bravery just as much as I thank you for your bravery.
You had said earlier that there's not a lot of people that have interviewed you that are actual experiencers, and I kind of want to get into a little nitty gritty. So last fall, I was astrally taken on a craft. I saw grays. As soon as I made eye contact with them, I instantly knew that I was supposed to be there. Like almost I had forgotten a doctor's appointment almost. They pointed to a bed. And then I completely lost memory after that. I completely forgot. I went about my day normal. I looked on my 15-minute break at work. I looked in the clouds, and there was like a rainbow cloud that was just there in the sky, and I took a photo, and I was just like, what is that? I've never seen that before. That later that night all came flooded back to me, except being on the bed. I don't remember the bed part, but later I had the channeling experience that John had briefly mentioned, and I wasn't a big believer in channeling. It's like hard to pinpoint whether someone's legit or not, but I felt their energy come into my body, and like it was almost like, it's so hard to describe, but it was like terabytes of information being put in, but there was also flashes towards like future events, and then also stuff they were showing me of my past, and like it was all like at once. It was really hard. It's hard to articulate. But one thing after that experience, I realized, and it was really hard to put to words what was going on, but I could feel like there was something deposited in me, and I knew that it was a time thing, but I didn't know what it was. So it's like having it's like a 5 terabyte file in my brain, or my essence, but I couldn't unpack it. And so when I went into your book of it was a time release capsule, like of like a data pack of information almost. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, that's what I'm trying to put to words to. So I wanted to kind of jump off of there. Why do you think that they're doing this with us, with experiencers or contactees? Is this to help give us just information? Is it to deposit some form of baseline understanding of how fundamentals of spirituality work in the universe? Or is there something that they've shown you in that way that gives answers to maybe some of these experiences others are experiencing as well, of like this, I'm carrying something around, but I don't know what it is inside of me after this event?
Yep. Okay, I might have to use some of my own experience to illustrate this, but I know exactly the feeling of carrying something around for years that you can't access. I describe in the early part of my book, 8-year-old child being given a massive download. They told me they were to explain it in terms I would understand. They said they were putting a book into my head, and that as I grew older, the pages would turn, and I would be able to read those pages and understand what's happening, and I would have information in those pages. So that was an analogy as to what they were doing. So we're talking about timing, Daniel, where they can put a massive amount of information into your subconscious, and it's all timed for triggering or timed to open. How they do this, I don't know, but it is timed to open at a certain time in your life, and you'll just like intuitively know how to do something, when to do something, what to say, where to go, or whatever. That's just putting it very in simplistic terms. And this is all part of the 3 waves that I talk about, each having tasks, separate tasks to do. Sometimes they will give you information about your past, which is necessary at a certain time when something triggers that book in the head to open. That massive amount of material will open to a certain part, and your understanding of the past will help you to action what you have to do there. There'll be a reason for it. So, for example, when I was 8 and I had a string of lights which were souls, but they were like different colours, brought into the room by some greys, and they told me that these were the souls of people who would assist me in my tasks in the future. Some of them had already incarnated, so they'd left their body at night or whatever to come onto the craft, to be present, and others had not yet incarnated, and they were just floating around on the craft, learning things, preparing for their lives. So I was shown them, and as each light approached me, it gave me some background information, which went into the subconscious and gone. But the proof of it is when I was looking on YouTube one day and I saw the scientist called Dr. Rudy Schill talking about black holes and quasars. And I've never really been interested in complex astrophysics, but astronomy, yes, but astrophysics is stretched too far for me. But I found myself watching it not because I was interested in the subject matter, but because I could not take my eyes off this person, because I felt I knew them, I had to contact them, I had to find them, and there was a reason. And it took me some time to actually get hold of the contact details and contact Rudy. I didn't think he would answer me, but he did. And as a consequence, he went through every single one of the experiences with me that are in my book and decided he would like to contribute to it. That was an enormous help to me as a non-scientist, having that kind of assistance to understand some of the things that I was describing. So these things help you along the way. And if you have been given, Daniel, this big amount of information, don't even try to access it, because your fantasy mind might take over. I'll put it that way. It will unfold, and just knowing that it's there is reassuring. As to what it's about, you'll have to wait and see. I still feel like there's massive things inside my subconscious, and I'm getting older, that have to open yet. So I'm hoping that I'm going to have quite a bit of input as time goes by yet in the field. So yes, people are being prepared. Millions and millions of people have been prepared in this way. And in the latter part of my book, in the last few chapters, I describe being on a craft in 2010 through to 12, I think, and seeing groups of scientists, like 250, 175, massive groups of scientists brought on the craft. And they are not meant to act like the scientist I mentioned before. They are not meant to be out there known as experiencers, or their grants disappear, their reputation disappears at this point in time. So they are given this information in the form that you've described, and I've described massive input of information, and it starts to filter out. So a lot of the technology I'm seeing at the moment that is very similar to theirs, or their bridging technology, possibly has been inserted in scientists' minds like this, and hence these developments take place. We don't know. But we do know that a lot of people are getting guidance through this kind of input. And sometimes the amount of information that's been put in is absolutely massive. And I have seen my 7-year-old son sitting at a computer, in front of a computer on a craft, being given hundreds and hundreds of images in his mind. And I write about it in one of the chapters. And he then had to do something with all of that information to change it around and then convey it to a computer, with the grey watching it coming up on screen to check whether it's correct or not. So we have this massive capacity that we don't know and understand yet of being able to have this information put into our consciousness as opposed to our brain, and to be able to open that and draw on it when the time is right with their assistance.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
I said, Daniel, that we talk about how they influence our consciousness, but how are they influencing our subconsciousness? And that's key. I love that, Susie, because that kind of broadens that thought, and it's a lot of positive things. So I think it'll come up when it does. I'm kind of curious now, because for some reason my mind was going, is that what deja vu is sometimes? I don't know. Just throwing it out there. I'll just ponder on that a little bit. That's like maybe a little bit of a time release on that capsule. Where you're like, wow, I feel like I've experienced this before, but I know I haven't. But yet here I am. But anyway, Chris,
you said something that I think is also really important when you mentioned our consciousness rather than our brain. And you mentioned a couple times Dr. Evan Alexander, who I've read almost all of his books. He was a neurosurgeon, atheist who had a full-blown near-death experience. And he talks about what he's come to understand as the new model of consciousness known as filter theory. For those that don't know, it's that the brain is more like a radio receiving a signal from somewhere. Kind of that, if you shut off the radio, the signal doesn't actually stop. In my research, one of the hypnotherapists that I'm particularly fond of is Dolores Cannon, and she talks about the waves also, and she mentions pretty much everything that you've been expressing. But the reason I'm bringing her up in this instance is that she also talks about like energy auras, and there is a portion in your book where you're talking about an experience where the Greys are kind of teaching about the energy bodies that we all have that are invisible to most of us. And I'm a firm believer that once that spirituality, that energy is a thing, and science kind of intertwined, it's going to change and revolutionize everything, including hospice care. So there was an instance where Dr. Childs had mentioned he didn't fully understand how you could heal something through the skin, like an organ, let's say. And the first thing that popped to my mind, I'm like, oh, they have energetic fields. That's how. And if you could just briefly touch on that, just because I think it's important. I've been certified in Reiki, so I know a little bit about it, but I think that's important for people to hear about the energetic fields, auras.
Well, there's three things here I'd like to comment on what you've just said, actually, Christian. First of all, Dolores Cannon. I'll tell you a little bit of information here. In 2006, I spoke in Australia, and a researcher I'd been working with convinced me, as an experiencer, to give a teaser of some information that I was putting in my book, and she suggested that I talk about the three waves and the complex agendas. And my gut was telling me not to do that, but for some reason, absolutely not to do that. But I made a terrible mistake and didn't listen to my gut. I listened to the researcher for various reasons. And so I put up on screen some of the charts that I've done to do with the three waves and gave a description of it, etc. And after my speech and during the break, an experiencer in Australia came up to me and said, I'm going to give a copy of your speech to Dolores Cannon. She's coming to Australia soon, and she'll be very interested in this new concept that you're talking about, the three waves. A few weeks later, Dolores went to Australia and was given my speech video. Then we had Christmas and New Year. That was in November. Then there was Christmas and New Year, and in February, Dolores began the first time ever to talk about the three waves and using my information. And I was very ill from that stage on, and I couldn't get my book out at that stage. Dolores got her book out in 2009, and I was shocked to find that it was named exactly the same as my charts that I had put up on screen it contained my information, but there was no reference that it came from me. So that was very disappointing. And I'm sure
The more you
she's had
know.
a lot
I didn't
more
know that.
gravitas to her theory than I have. But I just want to make that point because there is a lot of information stealing happening in the UFO field, and I think it's appalling because the person who has experienced this onboard craft isn't a regression therapist, but is an experiencer who experienced this onboard craft from the age of 8 when I first told about these 3 waves, really needs to be the person to initially speak about it. That's my opinion anyway. And so most people
Right.
credit Dolores with this information and not me. Okay, so moving on to I'm not sure if I'm on the right track here, but talking about information going into the consciousness or subconscious and the brain being some kind of filter. Is that correct, Christian?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
their mainstream is starting to like call it, or filter
Well,
theory.
in my book, I describe what I nicknamed sieving. So, if you've got a sieve with all the little holes in it and you put some flour or water or something in it, some of it is going to go out the bottom and disappear, and the rest, the solid stuff, will stay in the sieve. So this was a word I came up with in my 20s to describe what they do with you sometimes on the craft. So if you ask a question, sometimes they will give you an answer, and it may be short, okay? But at other times, if they feel that somewhere in your life you might benefit from a bit more information, they will just go and they will download a massive amount of information about that subject or question into your mind. And everyone is at various levels of being able to understand scientific or whatever information. So some of it will stay in the conscious mind, and you'll remember the next day or a couple of days after your experience, you'll remember some of this information. And the rest has just gone out the bottom of the sieve and it's gone into the subconscious, and it may rise somewhere in the future and you'll think, well, where did that information, how did I know that? Where did that come from? We all experience that in various ways from something we've read or heard or seen on TV. But this is a method that the ETs use to push as much information into you as possible that you can retain, and the rest will hopefully rise to the surface. So one of the things the ETs are all about is educating. They like to educate. So some people say, oh, they don't share anything, they don't say anything. Well, if you don't ask, they won't, but they do if they can. And the other thing was energy healing. Yes, I've got some drawings in some of my speeches of the technology they have that can see into the body. So they can do healing using sound and frequencies going into the body, but they also use the energy fields. And they actually told me I should not meditate. Many people do. My husband does, loves it, but I don't. I can't, because I'm not, since they told me and made me aware of energy fields within our body that we don't yet understand or even haven't really found much out about. We have the aura in the body, but we also have replicas inside the body that perform different functions that we are learning about or going to learn about. And for some people, meditation can disrupt that. And I'm one of those people, and perhaps some other experiencers are too. I don't know. I have seen them just manipulate a body in terms of energy and frequency so that healing just takes place. And on one occasion, they used me as a test subject, if I can put it. That this is something I'll be writing about in my next book, but I will talk about it because I've already talked about it on a couple of occasions. And that is, they stood me against a white screen, and there were 8 consoles, each with an ET behind it. And they said that humans don't realize that a lot of our illnesses are caused by traumas and things in the subconscious that have not emerged and been dealt with. and that we get this winding up or spiraling down effect of healing or ill health taking place. So I've actually had quite a lot of physical traumas and accidents in my life, and so they used me as an example, and they began shining lights at different parts of my body. And I'm talking about, say, a pink light that could be only the breadth of a hair, or a band of bright yellow light, or whatever, all different sized bands of light that carried different frequencies, aimed at different parts of the body. And once that part of the body where something originated was identified, then they could kind of unwind the spiral and know all the different places in the body that this trauma or illness had affected. And they could just take the frequencies right through and start a healing process, a road to good health. So there are some amazing things that they can do in terms of medical technology, which we will have the benefit of hopefully one day, if we don't already start producing some of it ourselves. When I spoke at the UFO Congress in 2018, I was approached afterwards by a medical professional in the States who was selling or putting into hospitals in the States a machine that could look into the body, but only in a very minimal way. A lovely guy came up to me after my speech, said, "I need to talk to you and you need my PowerPoint." So he shared all his images of this technology with me, and it is a very minimal and undeveloped version, even though it costs millions of dollars for this machine, of what they can do on a craft, but it is on the right track. Now, I have to ask, was that substituted? Was that instigated by the ETs in a medical scientist's brain and consciousness? Or have they been back engineering stuff off a craft? I don't know. But someone didn't like the conclusions I drew on my speech, because I actually was physically attacked the next day, shall we say, and as a result, 2 days later, I nearly died in New Zealand. So going back to what people talk about, courage and bravery, it is not an easy path to talk about these things. And when you are talking about things that touch on the technology side of things, as I do, and the consciousness controlling that technology, then that's kind of a little dangerous path to be walking for me, because there may well be people out there with vested interests in keeping this kind of thing quiet from the public so they can continue selling and inventing, putting together technology that is a replica and making money out of it. It's very difficult.
Thank you. And and that's crazy, because I didn't know who you were referencing in the book. And this is news to me. And I never got to speak to Dolores personally. She passed away. But at the same time, it makes me want to take a step back, because it's just learning your story, reading your book. That's interesting. So I'm going to have to take a step back and really see where that came from. But also, just to validate something that you mentioned very briefly, was the how you mentioned that the traumas causing physical illnesses and disease and things that we have. There was a near-death experiencer who had stage 4 lymphoma, and she had tumors all over her body. The doctor said that she didn't have much time left. She was going to pass. She went through the death experience, and then she was told she was not done yet. She had to go back. And the being of light had told her, you have to go back. And she's like, how? My body is destroyed. There's no way I can go back. And the being of light said to her that all illnesses start off energetically first. And he said, we're going to fix your energy, and the illness is going to go away. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And of course, the doctors don't understand this, because the tumors and everything disappeared. And they even did scans for a couple of days trying to how did this happen? This doesn't make any sense. And then they don't understand it. So they say, oh, I guess it was just a misdiagnosis.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right, Christian. And I recall at one stage my mother developed what they thought was a cancer behind the eye. They said that eventually she would probably lose that eye. Now, my two sons were quite young, and I'm not religious in the sense of going to a church. I do believe that there is a higher power that we tap into. But so my children and I used to send out every night this kind of prayer, if you put it that way. Please, universe, make grandma better. She was booked in to have her final appointment with the specialist, and then they would be making a surgery date. And she woke up one night and she said there's this amazing light all around her and tingling all around her face. And she went a few days later for her final appointment, and they did another final X-ray, and the circular tumour had gone. It was just left with a small black mark. It was gone, completely gone. So when you are directing energy or you are asking a higher power to direct energy, anything is possible. And this is what we don't understand about our consciousness and the power that we actually have. And the ETs show us this all of the time on board craft, that the power of the mind and consciousness.
Now, your book is The Dual Soul Connection. And what does that, for the audience, what does that really refer to as far as like a dual soul? I know that I've heard some people say that it's the gray alien soul and the human soul in the same body. And I just want to maybe try to clear up any kind of confusion that people might have about that. And thank you so much again.
Okay, well, there's quite a few versions of it out there now. I was reading a rather interesting one the other day of someone who interviewed me and has taken the dual soul information and made their own chart and put it out there now. So a bit different to mine.
Inspirations, just another Dolores Cannon.
But what I understand is that what I have experienced and have seen happening on a craft is a portion of a living grey is able to split off a piece of their soul's consciousness and meld it to your soul state before you incarnate. So imagine your soul is floating in a room on a craft. There's a big ball of electric light, and this spark of light comes from their head and melds. And I've seen that happen where this light is just kind of hanging there, and then this conscious piece of consciousness comes in, and there's like a terrific electric happening takes place where it's swirling and then it kind of calms down. And when you incarnate, you have this ability, if I can put it that way, when necessary. It's not something that happens all the time, but when the trigger or the occasion is right for it, you can have access to what I call the grey hive mind. So you can access this guidance. Now, I've seen this at play many times in my life before I fully understood this, where it was like there was something else guiding me or advising me. And we all can experience that, spirit guides or whatever. But this was somewhat different in that I would go on a craft sometimes, and the human body, and many experiencers describe this, would stand still and a grey would walk out of the body, would materialize in a physical form and walk out. So I would know that it wasn't me, Suzy Hansen, who was needed on the craft that night. It was the grey consciousness to be upgraded and informed or whatever, take part in something. And I describe lying on a bed and hearing my name being called, but then realizing it wasn't me, it was the grey part of me that was going somewhere. I have seen them leave in a ball of light, leave the body as a ball of light. And the interesting thing is, I'm not going to name this person, but one of my colleagues in Ufocus NZ, who had an aviation background, was a very upright person, very well known in his community, straight as a die, called a spade, very a person of high integrity, and people respected him. And he had memory of being in a white room, walking into a corridor and seeing a dreamlike memory, which I believe was actually real, and seeing a grey glide walking, like walking swiftly and covering a lot of ground as he went towards him. And he thought, oh, he's going to hit me, he's going to walk into me, and he just merged into his body. Now, this was a real shock and a wake-up call for this person who had supported me in Ufocus NZ for 20 years, but had never envisaged that he had been on a craft or had anything to do with that kind of thing. And so he recalled this, and he was close to tears when he told me about it, because he said it was so real. It was so real. And I said it probably was real. Have you ever had a dream about greys or aliens before? And he said, no, never. And so this person actually passed away with cancer, and he rang me a couple of days before he passed away, and he was not on medication then. He was just wanting it to go naturally. And he rang me at 8 o'clock in the morning from the hospital and said, I've been waiting and waiting for a civil time to ring you, Susie, because last night I couldn't sleep. There was a lot of noise in the ward, and I was lying on my side with my eyes shut, listening to it and hearing the nurses talking down the hallway. I felt like I was being watched. I turned over and opened my eyes, and there was a grey by my bed. And then he slowly faded, and as he faded, I had this enormous feeling of peace and that I was going to be okay. So there's lots of different ways that the ETs can communicate with us in this way. They can, and here, so we're crossing over into the afterlife in this kind of description, and I think that they're beginning to broaden out the ways in which they communicate with mankind. They're trying to cover as many bases as possible, I think, in their quest to help us to become aware of them. And we talk a lot about the greys, but in fact, I'd just like to say that on the craft you will see a lot of other species. They're all working together, or a group of them are working together, I should say. So I've seen Mantis and the Nordic style, human-looking, various forms of greys, various forms of hybrids, mixed species. And the greys are the front people because they have particular skills that are utilised in this program, but you look at the Mantis beings and they are the facilitators and planners. The greys carry a lot of things out and have the right craft technology. So we have a band of them working together for our advancement.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. And thanks for, verifying actually the story of the gentleman that you were speaking of, having that experience. And a little bit of it at least is kind of what I experienced. So thank you for validating that. That's beautiful.
My next question about the Mantis encounter that you describe in your book, where you were kind of talking about the procedure he was working on you. He was changing forms and shapes. Would you be able to go into a little bit more detail, expand on that?
Yeah. If it's the incident I'm thinking you're describing, is he was actually showing me, he was talking about how the dual soul, this was the first time they had used this process with humans. And but it exists very commonly amongst other species where they are working together and they will equip themselves with this dual soul for various purposes. So he was changing between the two because he was utilizing the skills of one species or the skills of another and combining them. And this is interesting because and so he showed me the two figures that could merge. So he was giving me a visual aspect that you wouldn't normally see so that I would understand how he was utilizing the various skills of each species. I've also seen the greys, a group of greys in a hallway, transform into beings of light and or transform out of them, I should say. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, look, you're having contact with the greys," and this is a typical human trait that we have, is the one-upmanship thing. And some people have said to me over the years, "Oh, you're having contact with the greys. You know, they're terrible. They're this and they're that." But I have experiences with the light being, and I just say, "Oh, that's good. You know, that's great." But I have seen the greys transform into a light being form, because that's what they use in other dimensions. They present themselves in one way for us here, as we understand a physical body has, you know, legs, arms, a torso, and a head, etc. But they transform into a silhouette of glowing, harshly glowing light. So you would call that a light being also. So there are various ways that they can transform. I've seen them just transform into a ball of light. I recall arriving on a craft as a ball of light. I knew I was in a soul form. I could see, hear, experience, communicate, everything as a ball of light, even though I had no arms and legs. And I remember feeling that I was late to a meeting that I had to attend. And I remember coming through the skin of the craft and going boof, 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 down through some walls, but there was no noise, of course. That's just me demonstrating how it was. I didn't sort of go down the corridor like this, because there was no need to, because I was a ball of light, and I just went straight through to the room where I was meant to be. And that's just how it is. And it took me many years, I might add, at this point, to feel comfortable with all of this. Especially when you have young children, and even though you have no reason to distrust them because they've never harmed you and they've never done anything to betray your trust or whatever on a craft, when you've got young children, you start to look at things slightly differently, and you can let your worries and imagination run away with you for a while, and then you have to dredge that all back again and get back to that place where your knowing inside you says they're not harming you, you're part of something and it's positive. And then you stop worrying about it, and you realize that your children are part of it anyway, and that they come back with you, and they're not going to keep them and fly off with them.
How you're talking about being a ball of light. I was mentioning that in many near-death experiences, they talk about being a sphere of awareness and having 360-degree vision.
Yes. That's right.
And there's actually this channeler. I read her book. It's called, her name is Barbara Brodsky, and it's called Presence, Kindness, and Freedom. And it's this being that no longer physically incarnates, but communicates with her, and she wrote the book. And they're just questions about, I like the book because it's not like just him, like her whole story or something. It's a question being asked, oh, what about forgiveness? Or what about this? And him answering. And in the beginning, there's a preface where he's explaining certain things about us. And he says, I'm what's called a being of light, and you're what's called a being of light and substance. That's what you are. And when you physically pass, you will be a being of light as well. And that kind of stuff, which is, it's all really validating.
That's really interesting, Christian, because when I observed this soul having this grey input come into the consciousness, the soul became dense. It became much more dense. It took on an awareness, and electrically, if I can put it that way, not being a scientist, it seemed more dense. So that's interesting.
Interesting.
I think it's part of the rules here, or the physical body.
Do you feel like your day in and day out, do you feel like you're in some form of a connection with them?
Over the years, you get used to, throughout my entire life, you get used to disconnecting, if I put it that way. You've got to lead your life, and they let you lead your life. But at times when there are, what can I call it? Sometimes in our life we have what I call a spiritual crossroad put in front of us, where we have to choose to go this way or that way. neither of them are necessarily bad paths, but they might have different outcomes in terms of your spiritual growth or understanding. At those times, I have felt that closeness and that guidance. Also, at times when something important, it's important I go in a certain direction, and they don't want me to make the choice. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And the other one is to do with my work in the UFO sighting field and in the contact field. I have a lot of stuff that just comes to me. And when I was preparing speeches for the overseas trips, my husband would be tearing his hair out because it would be 3 days before I was flying out. I wouldn't have finished my PowerPoint and I wouldn't have all my information together. And I would say to him, it's okay, I'm waiting because they're bringing something to me. I'm waiting. It'll come. Don't worry. And always within a few days of flying out, some information would just be incoming. Bang. I'd get it onto the PowerPoint. I'd put it into the speech. Oh, okay, ready to go. Happened like clockwork. The other thing that happened like clockwork was exactly 3 weeks before I flew out, I'd have a lot of computer problems. My computer would crash and I'd have a sign coming up saying that my security would have a sign coming up saying that my computer was being attacked by an outside source. So it cost me a lot of money, and since I have not been traveling since COVID, I've had no problems with my computer at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes I'd go to do an interview and the interview would just shut down. I'd be interviewed by the media and my voice would blow all their machines.
You're not interviewing these people.
What did I miss? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
And sometimes you have to do something in that period of time.
Right.
You have to process it, as you said, but you also have to action it, especially for someone like me who's in various groups, etc. But in my book, you may recall reading about changing my name at the beginning, somewhere near the beginning. And that was a guidance thing. I was just sitting there feeling sorry for myself. My first marriage had finished and it wasn't a very nice thing. Bank balance had been cleared out, etc., leaving me with 2 children. And so I was feeling sorry for myself, and out of nowhere, it was like this voice said, change your name. And I replied, to what? And it was like, it wasn't a voice, but it was like immediately it was there, Hansen, which was an old family name. And then that's how I met my second husband, who's been really supportive and does my images for me and holds the fort when I'm away. So that was meant to be. And that was probably not likely to be a spirit intervening. It was more likely to be ETs.
It's amazing when we finally find somebody that's on that same frequency like we are, that supports us in our endeavors and, is right there with us and we're right there with them. And, from what you had spoken about earlier about the inspiration, artists used to call it the muse, and they would see the muse, not just feel it. Sometimes they would see the muse. And so that muse may have been that energy being, that light being coming out from them. It was a part of them, but it was separate. It's just kind of, again, looking back at antiquity and different cultures and stuff, it's just everywhere. And just on a side note, I to the highs and the lows, right? Of like, okay, a lot of contact, kind of a silent period. And I think that a lot of people that are new into this, and that's perfectly fine. Please, we always want people that are new into it because, again, it's not really trying to convince the people that aren't believers. And, the people that aren't believers are trying to convince us believers to not believe anymore. It's more like there are a lot of undecided and people that are uneducated. And those are the people that we need to reach. But I think it was like there's this show called My Teacher, the Octopus or something like that.
Yes.
And It's the same way. Like with Melissa and I, it was little things where like, do you just have, not in a paranoid way, but I just kind of feel like we're being observed. And she'd be like, yeah, I've been feeling that for a while. And that would go on for a little bit of time. And it's much like that film with the octopuses. It's observing you. And you start observing it, and then I don't mean it in a bad way, but you start observing each other, and then you slowly make this bond, because as much as we say, well, we have to trust them, they have to trust us too. It's very risky for them. Very risky for them.
They've said we're very fickle, and that is the one thing that they find difficult about us. They're really precise and and quite officious and very organised, and they find us fickle. We're kind of all over the place and change our mind at a drop of a hat.
You mentioned, and we can see this very much happening right now with, more talks about disclosure in the UFO field and having kind of cults pop up where you have the essence of spirituality growing, and then you have a cult of personality or different things happen. What are ways that we can get ahead of those, or at the same time on the back end, maybe a fear-based narrative that's being pushed by governmental forces or other forces? Is that something that maybe the Greys have shown you of how to mitigate?
So two things. A long time ago, so like a couple of decades ago, I was in a group of humans where they talked about the rise of people coming out of the woodwork. There would be a time, and we would recognise that time because the world would become chaotic, and we would see more and more severe bad weather happening, and natural disasters, and small wars smattering here and there. Well, the planet's probably always been like that, but I think we are noticing it more now. Along with that would come a lot of people coming out of the woodwork making all sorts of claims about contact. Some of this would be quite deliberate, coming from various sources, and I don't need to name those sources. You probably know what I'm talking about, particularly US-based. So they would be muddying the waters, with using some people to muddy the waters, and that they would, in the background, be promoting certain people within the field to rise to prominence quickly, because they were carrying the right kind of message that they wanted to put out there, either a negative message or maybe a confusing and misleading message, or dare I say, a very classically New Age message, which is sometimes a little vague. So we're seeing this now. I'm looking at some of the speakers lists on some of the conferences, and I'm seeing a lot of young people talking who are making claims about kinds of contacts that people in my generation know are not actually happening anymore. That's quite disturbing, that people feel that they have to follow fame and fortune and recognition. And that's an unfortunate side to human nature, that the ego can take over, and the more you notice you are given, the more notice you seek, the more you want. It's addictive. So we're going to have this clash taking place, because there will be lots of really genuine people, as I talked about before, Nana, Granddad, Auntie and Uncle, who feel that because this is being discussed worldwide, it's safe to come out with what they've experienced. So you'll have those kind of people coming out, and then you'll have people who are having self-promoted, well-organised and well-promoted meteor rises to the top of what we might call ufology, which I don't really feel too much a part of. And so there will be a lot of misleading narratives, according to the Greys. There will be a lot of totally incorrect narratives, and the true narratives run the risk of being lost in all of that. However, moving forward, they said, the time will come when we've been through the whole, what they call the period of examination, time of examination is what they said. And I think we're at the very beginning of the time of examination now, where we're seeing scientists and academics organising conferences, talking about UAPs, but you will notice they are not talking about contact. They're talking about UAPs. That's safe, okay? So it will progress eventually. This could go on for years. We don't know how long this academic and scientific race for the data is going to go on. We see at the moment archives being purchased and scooped up worldwide, not only sightings archives, but contact archives, which is a dangerous thing. And I have personally been approached a number of times wanting to know if I will donate my archive or sell my archive. No, I won't. And my contact archive, no, I most certainly wouldn't disseminate that to anyone. That's private. There's a race taking place. It's a very human race to get the most information and to be able to use it and wield it in some way. This is sounding very human, isn't it? It's not the way ET thinks. So they warned older experiencers like myself many years ago that this would take place and to watch out for this. Right throughout all my years of contact, they have used the phrase commitment over and over again. You have to have the commitment to see this through or it's not going to work and humanity will suffer as a consequence. So I take you back to the idea of all these people having meteoric rises and making ever more fantastic claims about what they've experienced and what they know, till it's hard for anyone, including me, to work out what is fact and what is fiction and who wants that to happen. Not the ETs, it's factions of humanity that want that to happen so it can be buried. So the people like myself and many others who've been in this field for a long time and have no intention of backing out of it, they talked about a time when they've finished examining the UAP stuff and they can't really move any further unless they start looking at the contact side of it. Because the contact side of it is integral to the function of a craft, the technology, the knowledge behind everything. You're going to have to talk one day, scientists and academics, to the contact, people who've had contact. There will be factions that will push hard against that. They don't want us to be out there talking about this sort of thing at that point in time. And there may be things that are revealed that they don't want revealed, like I've talked about with me talking about the technology. So times will get tough for experiencers, contactees, abductees, whatever they like to call themselves. Things will get tough. And they could get dangerous, more dangerous. And at that point, you will see all of the wannabes, all of the people who are in it for the glory and the fame are going to drop away. They're not going to want to face what may come, the ridicule, the condemnation that people in my age group experienced decades ago will come round again in a slightly different form. And they won't want to face that and they'll drop away. And those who are left will have to have the strong commitment to keep going. That's what was drilled into us, and I've written about it in my book, drilled into us. Even the third wavers who are coming to the fore now will have to be ultra careful, and that is why the Greys and the other ETs are making sure that they are kind of paired up, if I can put it that way, with people like myself, who they're older experiencers, to keep them on track, keep them encouraged, keep them safe maybe, or given some guidance. And I've had a number of third wavers come to me recently for assistance with books, assistance with making their stuff public. Some of them I've said, yes, go for it. You have got the commitment, you've got the strength. And others I've said, don't do it. Don't do it. Just sit quiet until we've been right through this whole thing. Age and your age is on your side. When we've been right through this, however many years it may take, then you can talk about it. So we've got a lot of things happening behind the scenes that many in the UFO field, in the UAP side of things, are not aware about, that's happening within the contact field. and the general public isn't going to know about this. So cults, yes, that ties in with this. Cults that will arise out of nowhere, making claims about contact and messages and all the rest of it. And we have to be very careful and use our discernment as best we can. Think of one of the movies, it might have been Independence Day or something like that, and all of the hippies are up on top of one of the skyscrapers and they're welcoming them. Hello, welcome, welcome. And they send a big beam of light down and explode them and obliterate them. So that's not that the ETs are going to do that, but that's the sort of thing we're talking about where the discernment is not taking place, and there'll be people who'll suffer for it.
They're very patient, and they're very understanding, and they're very caring, and they're very loving, and they're just doing what they can to try to help us reach that higher level of consciousness. If we do it, then we at one point in time, not the soul, but humanity at one point in time could be doing the same thing for another civilization in another galaxy or in another dimension, like they are with us now. And to me, that's what we should aspire to do. That's beautiful to me. And I think that that's really for the greater good.
Well, I've seen the tubes of, I describe in the book, fetuses and creatures or beings growing in them, and they were going to be seeded onto planets, newly developing planets, different forms of life. So, yeah, there's just so many possibilities, and we don't know whether in our vast history that happened with us and whether we were put here to develop as well, or some intervention took place, which a lot of people refer to. So I think we've reached a point on the planet where we're a danger to ourselves, to every living thing on the planet, and to them. And they've had to make a decision as to whether they let us blow ourselves up, as humanity may have done to itself in the past, or whether they assist us this time to assist ourselves and actually get us to change course and be able to join our cosmic neighbours and do some of the things that you're referring to in the future.
You touched on this briefly. You had mentioned that, like the whole disclosure thing is more of like an American thing. And I personally am of the belief that it's going to be more like the 100th monkey effect, where all of our experiences coming together and talking about this and people seeing that they're not alone, to the point where there's that shift, which we're already starting to see in consciousness, where people are agreeing that something is going on. And then at a certain point, it's just, it will become ultimately ridiculous to refuse that this isn't what it is, and I think that's what's going to happen, like all of us having our own individual experiences and stuff to give us our own validation about things.
Yes, and that's what they were saying about, showing up, showing their craft more often, and showing a craft with entities until people just can't deny it anymore. And people in high places are seeing it, as well as farmers and truck drivers. As you said, the 100th monkey is really what we're aiming for. And if you look at children today, I look at my grandson, who knows more about operating an iPad than I do, and he's only 5. And a lot of the space reality and the hologram technology and all of that kind of thing is just seems normal to him. And this is assisting the 100th monkey as well through pop culture, etc. And we don't know how much of that is instigated by ET either. I look at, in New Zealand, we've got Weta Workshop, which was associated with the Lord of the Rings movies and The Hobbit, etc. Fantastic special effects used in those movies. And I had been writing about the what was before augmented. Can't remember anyway. Before augmented,
virtual reality.
Virtual reality, yeah. And I knew that what I'd experienced was much broader than that. And then I saw on New Zealand TV a young guy from Weta Workshop formed this augmented reality that they were using, and I knew immediately that that was much closer to what I'd experienced on a craft. And even what I was looking at was only a very small part of what they can do on a craft, but we're getting there in that respect.
But what would you say to any experiencers out there that haven't come forward? And I know that you mentioned that some should wait till the time is right, until we get to a certain point. But for people who, I guess, might be afraid or are new to this, or, they've always had experience and they're just coming out for the first time, or at least thinking about coming out.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's a minefield out there. So you really got to use your gut feeling and your discernment as to who you talk to. I think we've moved to the time now where for a long time experiencers were sort of like on the back foot and a bit like the underdog, and researchers were seen as the be-all and end-all. So I've had researchers in the past who've talked to me about my experiences, and even though I'm a former secondary school teacher and perfectly articulate and intelligent, I wasn't deemed to be quite fit enough to get up and talk about my own experiences. It had to be a researcher who did it for me. So for years, I had researchers talking about my experience, and I'm sitting in the audience watching, and I thought that was utterly ridiculous, but there was no way around it, because if you applied to a conference back then, you got a letter saying, oh, look, we're going to have a researcher talk about experiences because they'll give an overview. So personal experiences, or an experiencer who's quite capable of giving an overview and has interviewed a lot of other experiencers and works as a researcher themselves, wasn't deemed good enough. And now we've almost got the opposite of that, and anyone can stand up and say anything. But in terms of research, we are now have the situation where more experiencers are actually doing the research. So researchers are sort of slowly phasing out in many ways, and largely because if they are asked questions, they can't answer in the depth that an experiencer can answer, who's actually been there and experienced it. And the other thing is, forever and a day, we've had these divisions between those who've had experiences. So we started with the early 1960s, late 50s, 60s contactees, a name which has come full circle because a lot of people calling themselves contactees don't even know the history that other people existed in the 50s and 60s who called themselves that for a particular reason. So we had the contactees, then the abductees, and then the experiencers broke away from that because they felt their experiences were positive, and then we're back round to contactees again. And that sort of covers everyone, really. So, we're going through this transition, and as I said, it's a minefield because there are so many different kinds of claimed experiences, and it's very difficult to know who's who, to put it quite plainly. So I think when the time comes for academics and scientists to want to look at the contact experience, I do think that the logical place to start will be with those who've been on craft, because there's so many commonalities, there are so many pieces of corroborative evidence amongst that community of experiencers, which brings a real validity to the subject and to that kind of experience. So, for example, I have spent years since I was on a craft and spoke to a hybrid, and I asked some advice as to, can you give me some advice in life? It was kind of a silly question because the emanation he was giving off was so intelligent and so fine and high frequency that I was kind of awestruck by him and asked a stupid question. But it turned out to be not such a stupid question. I was initially disappointed because he just looked at me and said, corroboration. And my human mind was somewhat disappointed. I was expecting something more than that, and I got one word. But over the following weeks and months and even years, thinking about that word, I realised what a gift that word was, because the first time I found another experiencer who had traveled in a light elevator like me, it was like the most amazing thing in my life. Here is proof. Here is evidence. And I've had nuts and bolts UFO researchers say to me, that's not evidence. That's just coincidence. It's not evidence. Well, hello. If you've never known a person before and they're on the other side of the world and they can exactly describe an elevator on a craft as you can, isn't that some form of evidence? And since then, I've really appreciated that word corroboration, because now I've got a veritable encyclopedia of corroborative evidence that I've come across in my travels over the years. And I think that in the future, as I said, if they start with those who've been on a craft, they're going to find a lot of technological details, a lot of consciousness details, instrumentation and technology that functions through consciousness, and this is really where it's going to be at to start with. And then other kinds of experiences that people talk about are going to be added to the pool. But it seems logical that those who've been on a craft and seen and touched and experienced these things would need to be examined first, if I can put it that way. And also, they're the ones who've been involved in the 3 waves with the hybrid production as well. So we've got a number of things going for that group, which are important and may be important to science and academia one day.
I want to thank you for coming on to our small but growing channel and being able to devote these 2 hours with us. And it's been a pleasure and an honor. And I'm a little jealous because the sun is shining through your windows. And I love the sun. And I've always wanted to be at that part of the world, but I've never been able to visit it as of yet because of life, I guess. But it's a beautiful experience. I want to thank you for sharing everything that you did. I don't have any further questions, but you did answer some that I didn't even know that I had. And so for that, I want to thank you. And I do hope that we can stay in contact and that, we can essentially all join hands and march towards this together in peace and tranquility and just back each other up and be there for each other when times get rough. So thank you again, Susie, for everything.
Thank you, John. I've really enjoyed talking with the 3 of you, and it's I can feel your energy like through the screen. I can feel your commitment and your what you're gaining and learning from a subject, and I wish you all the best and keep going.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. And I just wanted to kind of add to, so we were talking about a particular word that they had given you of like kind of sharing the details and experience where you're putting the information out and then others are correlating the same information. And one thing that the strongest thing that came through with the entities in fall time was integration. As you've been talking, like I'm realizing that in real time that is multi-layered. And it's us putting ourselves out there. It's us sharing, allowing others to be activated or to be able to feel like they're not alone in the experience. And we're able to come together, not just with them, but us all together, of driving towards a cohesive collective consciousness and then changing the zeitgeist. Is there going to be a chance that you'll be able to have your the dual soul connection in audible form?
That's exactly what I'm thinking about, and also the French version needs to go into an ebook as well. But yes, Audible. But I would like to read it myself, and everyone's telling me no, get someone to do it for you. But I was just going to comment to you, Daniel. So it's really strange that you asked this question because it kind of answers your question for me. You were talking about, spreading the word and all of that, and I was thinking, well, for you 3 as experiencers, the Greys have said that we've all been taught to articulate the message and to use our voice and use our consciousness while we are speaking. And exactly as you said, it will go out in layers. And we've been taught to do this subconsciously. We don't realize we're doing it. So it will go out in layers, and everybody will absorb something according to their background, their experience, or where they're at, or whatever. And so then I was going to say that to you for yourself as a speaker in a podcast, and then you asked that question, was there going to be an audible? And it's kind of answered the question of everyone saying, oh no, don't you read it, no one will understand your Kiwi accent, but it's what you convey through your voice and through the way you read it and the emotions within you as you're reading it. So
one of the things that M told me and Melissa, my fiance, through the communications that we had was, put it out there, get it out there, put it out there. That's one of the common things that they say, which is like Daniel's integration, and it's okay. Then, that's not them forcing me. They're not threatening me to go speak out about this. That's the task. And it's going to have its burdens sometimes, just because I'm dealing with humanity, for crying out loud. I'm dealing with myself, but that's part of it, is putting myself out there. And so that's what I'm going to do. And we all need to integrate on these different levels, because how are we going to integrate with them if we can't integrate with ourselves?
exactly.
And it's time to grow up from the sandbox that the cat uses in the neighborhood, and actually go out there and start, doing better. We should do better. There's the cat.
All right, Susie, really quick, before we end, how can people find you, find the group that they can get connected with?
They can contact me through www.ufocusnz.org.nz. That's my sighting website. They can also go to www.communicatorlink.com, and that's where I do the experiencer work with my colleague and friend Cheryl Gottschall from Australia. And through Facebook and Messenger, they can contact me through there anytime. The friend button has disappeared off my Facebook page, but never mind. Lovely to meet you and talk with you.
Yes, it was a pleasure to talk and to meet you too, Susie. And please go to the links that Susie just provided to us. They're in the description below. Follow, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you learned something today. I know I did.